Well, for more on global tech hubs and the innovation shift, let's bring in Jeff Hoffman, a board member at the Global Entrepreneurship Network. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Now, which cities are really giving Silicon Valley a run for its money, both when it comes to attracting startups and really getting the talent that fuels them?
Well, you know, there's a lot. By the way, for the segment you just had, I just visited Guadalajara, and I was blown away with the way the local, the state government, the businesses, the startups, the whole scene is really, really growing there. Guadalajara is a place you wouldn't have thought of, and I think it's going to make this list one day. But London is a really great example of a city that's overtaking Silicon Valley. New York is still strong. You mentioned Shanghai, Beijing, Stockholm is on the list now. There are cities that were never on this list that are appearing on the list now because they're putting in the energy. They're doing everything it takes to become startup hubs, not just waiting for it to happen.
So for a lot of these cities, for example, Beijing and Shanghai, that are really on the rise, what are they doing right?
Well, you know, there's a couple of things. First of all, the index, the global startup ecosystem report that you referred to from Startup Genome, where that list is made of the top 20, it looks at 8 different factors, and one of the really important factors is global connectedness. And global connectedness, the lack of it, is why cities like LA and Chicago went down this year on that list. And the reason that Shanghai and Beijing got on the list as new entries is because they're really focused on inviting the whole world to see what they're doing. Global connectedness for all of their startups and creating global markets is a part of what they do every single day. I think that's making a huge impact.
And as you mentioned, there are some cities really kind of shifting downwards in the rankings. You have Tel Aviv, you have Chicago, you have Bangalore. So what are some of the hurdles that they're facing, and how are they addressing them?
Well, you know, one of the interesting things that doesn't show up, because it's on the negative side, is poaching. Tel Aviv, Israel was a startup nation. Tel Aviv had a lot of great entrepreneurs. So you know what the rest of the world did? Said we should try to get some of them. People pursued their talent in some of these cities to get them to leave and start creating startups everywhere. So that's part of what it's about, but it's also they scored low on that global connectedness index. They were focused a lot more inward instead of inviting the world to join them and giving their startups access to global markets. And I think, to your question, what do they have to do to change it? I think that's a big piece. They've got to start being a little bigger part of a global community and making sure that if you start a company there, the city and the ecosystem there will make sure that you get opportunities to pitch your stuff to investors and to markets all over the world. That's why people like China. It's an entry into a huge market. So a lot of people are looking at startups in China and entrepreneurs there because it gives them access to a market they didn't have access to before.
Now, let's also look at some of the trends you're seeing in some of these emerging industries and markets in the startup space that perhaps really should be on people's radars.
Yeah, so, you know, at the Global Entrepreneurship Network, we just did an event in South Africa a few weeks ago. We had a Global Entrepreneurship Congress, and we had a record 173 countries attend and bring their entrepreneurs and their ecosystem. So we had a chance to really address this question that you asked. And I have to tell you, for emerging markets, some days it feels like everything that you could ever dream up to invent has already been invented, and it hasn't. Healthcare is a huge one. The transition is moving from the hospital to the device. Self-administered healthcare and preventative care is a huge market that technology is going to rewrite. Education is one of those. Taking education out of a traditional classroom and delivering it to you in your handheld device is a big deal. And so in terms of emerging markets, Africa, I'm so excited every time I go to Africa, and we work with startups all over the world now. I go visit them in 60 different countries. Africa, the reason that Africa is rising so fast as an emerging market is because they're skipping all the middle steps, right? They don't have the hospital structure, the education structure the Western world has, so they get to start by skipping all our mistakes and going right to our best practices, taking the ideas and the technology that were created elsewhere and literally rewriting industries starting with our most recent and best technology. So I'm really excited about those markets and in those industries.
And that's very interesting. You mentioned Africa, obviously a continent that actually has the youngest population in the world. Where do you see their growth heading?
Well, you know, that also, by the way, that young population is a big piece of this. One of the other indices that the startup list is made on is called founder ambition. And that is a big piece, because the more ambitious the founders are, the more likely they are to succeed at startups. It takes a lot of guts and determination to do that. So we're seeing a whole generation. Now, this is true everywhere. But it's part of why China is rising, because this next generation of young people are ambitious. They want to make a difference. I see that every day. Like I said, I just came back from Africa and then a trip to visit startups in Southeast Asia. But in Africa, I see a lot of young people that say, the future is ours.
Right.
We can design Africa's industries, its economy. We can take over. And so that founder ambition, these people don't see the problems, they see the opportunities, and they're pursuing it with optimism and passion.
Certainly an important message to take from that. Thank you so much, Jeff Hoffman, board member of the Global Entrepreneurship Network and advisor to the U.S. State Department's Global Entrepreneurship Program.